Welcome to the Line Life podcast. I'm Jeff Postlethwaite, Senior Editor of T&D World, and today we're bringing you more stories of the grit, courage, and inspirational teamwork that it takes to be a line worker.
Welcome to the Line Life podcast. My name is Amy Fishbach, and I'm the field editor for T&D World magazine. For part 2 of our Problem Solver series, we are featuring guest Bruce Thompson. I first met Bruce at the International Linemen's Rodeo years ago when he was competing with Southern California Edison and IBEW Local 47. He was wearing a GoPro and took some great shots of the International Linemen's Rodeo. We will include a segment about his memories of the rodeo on another podcast episode, but for this episode, he'll be talking about his earliest memories of his dad working in the line trade, how he got inspired to follow in his footsteps, and his career working as a foreman and a training crew foreman for Southern California Edison. We'll also be talking about how he launched his own invention called the Step Up, which helps line workers get into proper positioning when they're working on wood, steel, and composite poles. Bruce, thank you so much for joining us today for the Line Life podcast.
Well, thank you for having me on, Amy.
Bruce, to begin, can you go back to your earliest memories of your father working in the line trade and how you used to go out on the job with him?
My first memory was when I was about 12 years old, summertime. My dad was working on a 230 transmission line west of Miami. And I was into motorcycles and I used to ride. There was a right of way, not about 3 blocks from my house. I would ride on that. But the opportunity to get to go to work with Dad was way cool. And then to get to bring my motorcycle along as well. I just loved it. And so that whole summer that I was 12 years old, pretty much every day I went to work with my dad, at least twice a week. I'd go to work with him during the summer and I would ride up and down the right of way. And then of course the linemen and the other crews along the right of way would always, hey, come on, wave me over. And I pretty much spent lunch with a different crew every day. And the guys would pick me up in the bucket and they actually taught me how to operate the bucket. It was a 110-foot high ranger. And at 12 years old, I was just fascinated back then with helicopters. I wanted to fly. And this was the next best thing. I could control this boom truck and just wherever I turned that handle and whichever I could fly around at 100 feet in the air. And so again, the guys just took to me and I got to know a lot of the guys along the crew and I love the way they interact and they razzed each other and they just had a good time and they were just fun to be around. And so they'd let me, just little things, not doing any line work stuff, but if they had to pick something up or whatever, and they let me play around with the boom truck. I could operate the boom trucks. I got to operate a bulldozer. And one thing that really attracted me to line work was when in school, I loved wood shop. I loved metal shop. I loved making things and building things. The rest of it, I could care less, honestly. And so I excelled in the things that I really liked. I got A's in wood shop and metal shop. And so the rest of the stuff, I just didn't take to it. And so when I saw my dad after working with him that summer, he'd get paid. And I'd see him take his check out. He'd look at it, make sure he's good. Then he'd sign the back of it, hand it to my mom, and she'd go put it in the bank. But that was the extent of paperwork my dad had to do. And I thought I want to be a lineman. That's the job for me, So I knew at 12 years old, I wanted to be a lineman when I grew up.
That's awesome. So then, Bruce, you had your apprenticeship in Colorado. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
So being born and raised in Florida, I had sand in my shoes. And so when I went to Colorado, that was the first time I'd ever seen it snow. And so you can imagine being a groundman and never having worked in the cold weather, the learning curve was like, what? So in 1976, I got indentured as an apprentice in Colorado. I'd already been working in Colorado since, August of 75. As a groundman and actually as an equipment operator. And so I got my first job as an apprentice working on a 230 line that went from over by Breckenridge up and over the Continental Divide over to the other side of the Eastern Slope. And on that job, it was a helicopter job because it's all mountainous and it's the highest transmission line in the United States. I know it was at the time. I did my apprenticeship literally all over Colorado, all over Wyoming. I mean, I could tell you some hair-raising stories about stuff that went on up in Wyoming.
Tell me more, Bruce. I'd love to hear about your Wyoming stories.
Me and my wife were married in 1977. I was a four-step apprentice. So I'd already been an apprentice for 2 years. And the director, he was pretty adamant. He told us all that we do need to get that paperwork turned in on time. And with all the traveling around, moving around, whatever, I forgot about it, spaced it out, whatever. I didn't get my paperwork on time. And so that job that I was on, when that job ended, I had called the director up and say, okay, I've been laid off. And then he'd call back and, tell you another place to go or what your next job would be. Well, when I called and told him I was laid off, I got the chewing out of a lifetime. Let's just say it that way. And my next job was in Gillette, Wyoming. And this was right after Christmas. And I went up there and we had just moved out and we had bought a fifth wheel. We bought a 32-foot fifth wheel. My wife was pregnant. We had to go to Gillette and it was like 40 below zero up there. I mean, it was bitter, bitter cold. It would warm up in the day to like 5 or 10 below. And then it would get cold down to 40. And we're in this little paper thin summertime trailer that was probably made in California. It was a wilderness trailer in deep winter territory. I would come home from work and of course the wife would be doing dishes and, using the living, right? But the water, I had the gray water valve open and the water would run out. It wasn't collecting in the holding tank because I didn't want it to freeze, but it would just keep running. And then the sewer hose would be froze. The bottom 2 or 3 inches of my trailer holding tank would be froze. I'd have to come home and thaw out the holding tanks just so I could get the water to go down in the bathtub and then go back to work the next day and work a whole day. But I learned my lesson about turning in my paperwork. That was the last time I did that. But yeah, there was some crazy, crazy times, with all the travel, it got to a point, the contractor I was working for, it was a very small contractor. I think it was Industrial Electric was the name of the contractor. And he had a lot of little jobs all over Wyoming. And so we would go 2 or 3 days and do a job on the western part of the state. And then we'd go outside of Yellowstone and we go back to Rawlins and we go to Casper. I mean, we literally traveled all over. It got to the point I would not even disconnect my truck from my fifth wheel. I'd just pull into a space, hook up the power, level it front to back as best I could and side to side, because in another day or two, I'm going to be leaving.
So, Bruce, talk about what it was like to travel during your apprenticeship compared to those apprentices in the line trade that may stay in one location.
Having worked at 3 power companies during my lifetime and probably over 30, 40 different contractors. When I worked at Edison, I was in the training department and the apprentices would come in and they would whine about having to come down to Chino where the training center was. And I would tell them, you guys don't have any idea how good you had it, dude. I was up in Wyoming and my classes were down in Denver and I would have to go down, leave on a Friday night, drive all night long just to make it to the class the next morning and then go to class. And we weren't paid to go to those classes. Those were on our own time. Whereas with the power company, you're getting paid to go to the classes, which was really nice. I had a really interesting apprenticeship. I feel very blessed to have worked with what I think are some of the best journeymen ever. And I don't think of myself that way, but one thing I did learn was the importance of training. And I just feel that, out of respect for the guys that took time and trained me, that's part of being a journeyman lineman. And I've tried my whole career to pass that on to the apprentices that I've been able to work with.
And Bruce, you worked as a foreman and also a training crew foreman for Southern California Edison. What was it like for you to train the next generation of line workers?
What we did as a training crew foreman, basically, there were 4 of us. We were selected, and then we had 4 other guys that were selected, but they were on a 1-year cross training, so they could kind of try it out before they went for a permanent position. So as a training crew foreman, I had a group of 4, sometimes 5 apprentices, and I would go out and we would do tear downs. We would do new line construction, all de-energized, and then we would do secondary where we'd go in and wreck out the old open wire. And so I was selected to be a training crew foreman. If I had a guy struggling, I could work directly with him and try to bring him up to speed. But after a while of working with these different apprentices, what I found, I'd call him like a problem child. So one of the districts would send me a guy that's having a problem climbing or a problem working or whatever his issue was. And what I would do is I would take and put him with a guy that's a step or two or three, whatever, below him, and he would autocorrect. I mean, he would see, okay, wait, I'm a 4-step apprentice and I'm working with this guy. He's a 1st-step apprentice. He's working circles around me. And so the apprentice would just self-adjust. He would realize, I mean, the foreman and the lineman in the district that he came from had probably been telling him, hey, man, you're not cutting it. You got to pick it up a little bit. He was working with journeyman. But then when he got with an apprentice that was a lower step than him, he would see it for himself, that he wasn't where he needed to be. They would self-adjust. And the two guys made each other better. Because if you really want to learn something, learn it good enough to teach it. And that helps you. It helps the people you're trying to help. One of the worst things you want to do is be in front of a group of apprentices and one of them ask a question that you just have no idea. And you should know because you're a journeyman lineman. You're asking a question about transformers or connections or whatever. And as a journeyman, you want to have the answer for those guys.
Yeah, that's good advice. And then after you returned from Southern California Edison, you worked for contractors in the line trade. Can you talk about what that was like for you and some of the things that you did in that position?
Well, it was definitely different pace than the power companies have. The power companies have a longer, let's make it to the finish line type attitude. And safety is definitely high priority with both. But it seems like the power companies have, well, okay, we didn't finish it today, guys. We can come back tomorrow kind of a thing. Whereas the contractors, you work until you get it done. And so the pace, I mean, I had worked at that pace years ago, but I worked for Edison for 28 years and did a lot of storms, got to travel a lot within Edison. I worked in pretty much every district towards the end of my career. I did retire from Edison June 30th, 2015. And I literally went back to work for the contractors on July 7th because I was on the books. And by July 7th, I cleared out for a smaller contractor, City Light and Power, on a short call so I could move my way up on the books. And then I did another short call. And then I went to work for Hinkles and McCoy. And it worked out really perfect because I got to work with Bryce Monday, who was my climbing partner when we were doing the rodeo. So I worked on a service crew with Bryce, which was real handy. We could practice that kind of stuff.
And after you retired, you not only worked for contractors, but you also got your engineering A license and your C10 high voltage electrical license. And you were planning to start your own company, but right now you are launching your own invention, the Step Up. Can you go back to your days as an apprentice in Colorado and talk about how that idea came about from you climbing poles for hours at a time?
Back when I was a 3rd-step apprentice in Denver, and I was working for Sturgeon Electric back then, and we were doing, different jobs for, it was Public Service Company of Colorado. I believe they've been bought out by somebody else since then. But anyway, we were working for Sturgeon in Denver, and we were doing these basically property line secondary, replacements. And I was the only apprentice on the crew and had a foreman, a lineman, and a groundman and myself. And I had white boots, but I have really high arches in my feet. And even with good boots, white boots or Westco boots, my feet would still hurt. And so I was thinking, man, if I could come up with some small little platform, just something to get your foot off of that 1.5 wide stirrup that's going across your arch, how it would, make life a lot easier. When your boots aren't right and your feet aren't right, your feet hurt. So that's been kicking around in my head for over 40 years. Well, as they brought in these composite poles, I had a friend reach out to me and ask me about a baker board that would be able to go onto a composite pole. So in other words, you couldn't use this traditional chain that a baker board had. And so I ended up getting two Baker boards. Basically, they both had issues and they just threw them in the trash. But between the two, I was able to make one that would work. And I basically retrofitted it to handle a 4-inch ratchet strap. And then I had the part that touched the pole dipped and coated so it wouldn't scratch the pole. But I still thought, well, you're still dealing with this big, awkward, heavy thing, that you have to, it's going to take one guy. That's all he can carry back into the yard by himself. And I wanted to come up with something lightweight that linemen could use. And you wouldn't be like, oh, I don't want to take the time to put that up. And so what I've come up with is a little 2-tiered platform. It's got 2 levels. Okay. And it's probably about 18 inches wide and it sticks out away from the pole about a foot. And again, there's 2 tiers. I made it to work off of the bottom level. And so when you set it up with working on the bottom level in mind. And again, that's based on your heights and your work preference of how high you like to work or how low you like to work. But the really cool thing about it is these composite poles have steps. So do the steel poles that they're flying into forest and then the linemen are having to climb the pole with steps, which is fine. But when you get up there, trying to work off of these steps is very, very painful. Your feet, and if there's 2 of you up there and you're the same height, it's just a nightmare because you're both 2 people are trying to occupy, 4 feet or trying to occupy 2 steps. And so with my device, it's lightweight. It weighs, I think, 23 pounds. It's got a ratchet strap that stays attached to the device. I've got a little cool buckle. You guys have, I'm sure, all used the Chance transformer gen, and you got the little triangle buckle that comes around and hooks on a buckle. I've got the same type of buckle, but instead of making it, at first I was actually buying those little buckles that you could attach to the ratchet strap from Hubble. And so we ended up making our own. We take a solid block of aluminum and then we cut it out on the CNC machine so that it fits that buckle really well. And it's really strong. I don't have to worry about that part we made on the CNC machine. And so this is, again, a 2-tiered platform. The groundman sends it up to you on the hand line, and then you put it where you think you're going to be to work. And you can literally work 180. In other words, if I'm on the cross-arm side, I can work that entire side of the pole. The other guy on the other side of the pole, he can work that side. If he's shorter or taller, whatever, he can mount his where he wants to mount his for him to be comfortable. I can mount mine where I need to be.
Bruce, can you talk about how long it takes to mount it to the pole and also how the other line workers are responding to the invention?
It literally takes, on my website, I've got a video of me attaching it, but while I'm attaching it, I'm talking about, okay, look for this, make sure, you have some slack so you have enough reach to go around. And even with me talking, it's like a 30-second video. Back to Josh Unkman, when I was making them out of 1-inch pipe, and I wanted to video him mounting it just to see how long it would take. And literally within like 15 seconds from the time he got his hands on it, he had it mounted to the pole and was already climbing past it. So anyway, back to the whole deal with the step up. It's a little 2-tiered platform that everybody that has used it actually really likes it. And when I do demonstrations, it just puts a smile on my face when someone comes up and they're looking at it. And I say, hey, man, please take my belt, stand on it. About half the guys do, and the ones that don't. But the ones that I say, oh, come on, please, just try it. And then they do. And then you see that look, it's kind of like almost like the light bulb above their head goes off and they go, wow, this is amazing. I can reach anything and everything I need to reach. I can spin around in my belt. I can put it at the height I need instead of working off of those poles, which are already there and either think the work is too far away or too close.
Now, can you describe what it feels like to have gone from making them in your garage and starting up the company with your wife to now having a manufacturer make them and have them being used by some of the line workers working for utilities in California?
Well, I started off making these myself, and I realized very quickly that I can't do line work full time and, build these and actually build them to where other people, can buy them, because the process I was using, when I started out, I made them out of 1-inch pipe. And from the experience I learned as an apprentice, learning to weld in substations, I learned how to weld aluminum, got certified, and I learned how to bend pipe. And so that to me was just the practical way to make it. And in reality, it wasn't, because I had 17 pieces for each step up that I'd have to cut. I'd have to chamfer the edges. I'd have to put it so you could weld the pipe to another piece of pipe in the middle. And it was just so time consuming. And so I found a local guy that actually has built stuff for the aerospace industry. And I mean, the guy is just super smart. And so he kind of helped me. He says, what do you think if we make this out of 1/4 inch by 2-inch flat stock, and we bend it to achieve the same design you have? And so we ended up doing it that way. He made some for me. I made some myself. But again, it was just too time consuming. But I was having a hard time with the design we had, because we were bending basically almost like a heart shape, but without the point at the bottom, out of one piece of metal. And we were doing it by hand. Trouble was getting two of them to be exactly the same. And so my buddy came up with the idea, Bruce, let's just bend it in 2 halves. We'll weld it right where we weld it together. We'll add a gusset, and that'll tie it all together. So we built this really cool jig on his CNC machine. And then we ordered the material. We had to take the material to a water cutting shop, and then we'd pick it up. We'd take it over to another guy that would bend it, and then we bring it back to his shop, and then we could weld it up in that. And we built one like that, and it was, oh, good, this is the way we're going to go. But we looked at the amount of time we spent bending it, cutting it, all these other things. And so my buddy says, why don't we just try one on the CNC machine? So we bought enough material to build 2 full units. We bought 4 solid blocks of aluminum. These are 3 inches thick, 18 inches wide, 12 inches the other direction. And we put it in the CNC machine. He had drawn it up on his computer, and the machine just carved out this amazing thing. And it's a bottom and a top, basically. So you start off with a solid piece, and you carve out the bottom, and then you turn it over, put it back in the machine, and then it cuts the design of the top. And I don't know, after seeing that, it was just like, that is so much better than anything I had ever dreamed of.
And talk about the advice that you've gotten from other line workers that you've talked to and how you've kind of integrated that into your invention.
Thank you to all you guys that have given me ideas and suggestions to make the step up better. It wouldn't be where it is without your collaboration. So bottom of my heart, I thank you for all your input. I'm the one who came up with the concept of the 2-tiered platform. But again, I've had all the help to get it to where it is from other linemen. That, hey, Bruce, why don't you do this? What do you think about doing that? And again, both half of the ideas were great. The other half, were not, a direction we wanted to go. But thanks again, guys, for all your help.
So, Bruce, now can you describe how the step up is different from traditional steps? The way I understand it, it kind of slopes up a little bit and it fits more of your natural positioning of your foot when you're working off a pole.
Yes. So what we did is, instead of a flat platform that's 90 degrees to the pole, we've sloped the back of the platform so that when you lean back, when you're standing on it and you lean back in your belt, your foot is still at a 90-degree angle to your leg. And so it feels like you feel like you're standing straight up on flat ground, but you're up on top of a pole, leaning back in your belt. So, ergonomically and all that, it is, like I said, super comfortable. One of the things that brings me the most joy when I do a show is watching a guy get on it and then just like, wow. And I relate to it as, it's kind of like a motorcycle. You can look at the latest and the greatest model of motorcycle, and you can walk around it. You can even sit on it, but you don't have a clue what it's really like until you actually fire it up and take it for a ride. And that's kind of like what the step up's like. You can look at it, and I've had a lot of guys, I'd never use that. I ain't got time to put that up. But those guys, if they do, and that's what's really cool, is I've had a couple of those guys that I'd never used that. And I got to work with them and they used it and they were just like, man, I never would have dreamed it was this nice. I thought it would take too long. I thought it would be just an extra thing I have to do, but literally, from the time you get your hands on it, 15, 20 seconds later, and you got a comfortable place to work from. And one thing I've heard from multiple guys that are using them is that they told me, they said, Bruce, man, when I have to work off of the steps, when I get home, I'm beat. I'm worn out. But when I work off your step up, I get home, I still have energy to play with the kids. And so that makes me feel really good.
That's awesome, Bruce. I love hearing that. And then can you talk about your plans for the future of the Step Up? You had mentioned that one day you'd love to see it out on the Lyman's Rodeo grounds.
Yes, I would love to sponsor an event. I have competed in Kansas City, I think it's 24 or 25 times over the years. The first year I went back there was 1992, and I've been back there, I think 24, 25 times. I actually went back there last year and competed in the rodeo as a climber at 66 years old with a team that I had competed with before. So in other words, I'd like to sponsor an event and hopefully bring in a composite pole manufacturer and have them supply the poles. I'll loan them the step ups, and then the rodeo committee can come up with whatever they want after that. So basically, my vision is to get a composite pole manufacturer to supply the poles. I'll supply the step ups, and then the committee can make it an insulator change. They can make it a cross arm change. They could do whatever. But what I'd like is just that leave out the steps, put the steps in to get up to about what would be below the secondary level, and then have it where the lineman has to put the step up in that little section, because otherwise he's not going to be able to reach it. So he'll step from the last step to my step up, and then he can reach whatever he needs to reach up there. But I would like that all the linemen that come to the rodeo to actually mount the step up, work off of it, and take it down and send it to the ground. I think that once they see how easy it is to use and how much better, position they can achieve using it versus working off of the steps, I think that will open a lot of linemen's eyes to, work smarter, not harder. Because myself, I've had I've had surgeries twice. I've had a torn meniscus on my left, had a torn meniscus on my right, and then my right, back in 2014, my right knee was literally bone on bone.
Ouch, that sounds really painful. How were you able to handle that and the other pain that you might have gotten from just so many years of climbing and working out in the field?
I was a general foreman for Hampton Tedder down in Port of Long Beach, and one of my foremen had an 818 number, and I hadn't saved his number to my phone. So when I saw the number, I thought it was him. And, hey, what's up? And it was this sweet lady on the phone, and her name was Crystal. And she worked for Dr. Dereza, and they were basically just cold calling people, telling them about stem cells. And she told me she says, do you have pain? I got neck pain. I got back pain. I got knee pain. She says, wow, you sound like a good candidate. I think we could help you. So I went to the doctor appointment, and keep in mind, literally my right knee was bone on bone. And 2 days later, he had an appointment for an MRI, which I've never got an MRI with anybody in less than a month. And what they did is they went into my right hip and they pulled plasma out of my hip. And then he's got this really expensive machine that spins your plasma and separates your stem cells from your plasma, I guess. And then he injects my own stem cells into my knee based on that MRI that he took. And honestly, Amy, my knees are better now at 67 years old than they were when I was in my 30s. I've had both knees done. I've had my shoulder done. I went back to Dr. Dereza, and he did another MRI and x-rays, all this kind of stuff. And he calls me up, and it was funny. He says, congratulations. I go, what do you mean congratulations? He says, congratulations. You've managed to screw up everything you can possibly screw up in your left shoulder. And he starts listing up all this. You screwed up your rotator cuff, this, that, other. Everything you could name. And finally he said, you burst your bursa sector. Well, bursa sector are in your knees. He goes, no, you got them in your shoulders too. You screwed that up too. So we had to wait about a month. And after, the swelling went down and everything, He did another MRI and got the approval from Lineco, and he actually put my stem cells into my shoulder, and I can now lift my left shoulder. It took me a year before I could get my elbow up level with my ear. But I've kept working at it and kept working it. My left shoulder is not as strong as my right, but at least I've got all my mobility back. All from my own stem cells.
That's wonderful that you were able to get mobility and range of motion through the stem cell treatments, Bruce. That's awesome. And talk about the importance for line workers. I know when they work on wood poles, they can use their gaffs and climb up, but on a steel or composite pole, obviously that's not an option. Talk about the importance of proper positioning when working on those types of poles.
You're out of position the whole time on these composite poles and steel poles. You're working out of position. And so that just makes you more tired. And in my mind, makes you more susceptible to making a mistake and or injuring yourself. So that was kind of the goal behind the step up, was just to get something out there that guys could work off of so that it could work in the proper body position, like we did when we were working off of wood poles. With a wood pole, you put your feet where you want to because you're putting the hook into the pole exactly where you want to. When you're working on a pole that only has steps and you cannot use your gaffs on it, you're stuck with working off of those steps, whatever position they happen to be in. And so, I like to tell guys like this, okay, so if you're on that pole's right in front of you. So we call that 12 o'clock. Your left foot is over here at 9 o'clock on the pole in the center of the pole. Your right foot is over on the right center of the pole. Your feet are already right now, just going from the surface of the pole. Like if you're climbing a wood pole, you're climbing on the surface. When you move your feet to those pole steps, they move about 6 inches each further forward. So that puts your legs at sometimes almost a 45-degree angle. And when your legs are at that angle and your belt's belted where it is, it feels like it's putting a lot of extra weight on your feet. Okay. So with the step up, you move your feet more back under you and you have more of a 30-degree angle. Okay. And when you lean back in your belt, now your knees aren't, being jammed up in your legs, feel like they're being jammed into your hips because of that angle of your belt and angle of your legs. So the step up allows you to stand in a more upright, more comfortable. It makes you feel like you're working in your hooks more than when working from the steps.
What is your advice for other line workers who have an idea on how to improve productivity or safety in the field?
If you guys think about it, most of the stuff we have came from linemen, you know? So, and I've had a lot of young guys come up to me, hey, I got this thing, how do I go about it? And I gladly share the knowledge that, it took me a while to figure out, but I'll gladly share, if you guys want to know, I'll gladly tell you my path, the path that I took. If you got something that you think is legit, I would start off, what I kind of went about it backwards. I built a prototype myself and I tested it as far as using it. And again, when I left Edison, I went to work for the different contractors. I actually brought it to work with me when I was working for City Light and Power because we were working property line poles and you'd have 7 or 8 secondary services off of the pole. And it was just so much more comfortable to stand on this instead of trying to hang off of the steps. So if you guys do have an idea, kind of keep it close to your chest. Be mindful of who you share that idea with and get a good patent attorney. I got a really good patent attorney out here in Corona, California. I will gladly share his number with you.
And now, Bruce, talk about what other inventions you have in the works.
I do have other products that we're going to be selling. A really cool thing that we've come up with is a lot of the equipment, like say an RCS cabinet. Well, the kids are coming along and they're kicking it or they're reaching up and breaking it off. And so we've come up with a thing we're going to be selling probably by or sooner than the International Rodeo that will protect the lock and secure the cabinet better. And then we have another thing that at Edison, when I was there, they still do it. You can't just walk up with a shotgun to a pad mount transformer and switch the high voltage side switch. They want it done remotely. In other words, they want more 15-foot standoff distance. So a lot of times in front, people will put stuff up right in front of the transformer, leaving only that little 8-foot window. So you can't get the 15-foot standoff you would need to with a stick because there's something there. So we've come up with a little deal that you could put in there, and then you can run a 1/2-inch extension through it, put a 1/2-inch drive ratchet with a ring on the end, and then you can get 90 degrees off to the left or off to the right, and with a rope, and then you can operate this. And again, that's something probably Edison specific that only they will want, but there might be other utilities as well that would be interested in these things. And that was one of the reasons we named the company Effective Safety Products, because we really wanted to have something that's effective, something that works, something that the guys will want to use.
And Bruce, is there anything else you'd like to say about your career in the line trade?
Thank you guys again, all the linemen. Most of the linemen that helped me out are long passed on, but it's been a great career for me. We've raised 6 kids and traveled all over the place and settled down and get to live where we want to live and work where we want to live.
Bruce, thank you so much for being a guest on the Line Life podcast. I really enjoyed hearing your stories about your invention, the step up, and your life in the line trade. And we wish you the best of luck in the future. And we hope to see you out at the International Lineman's Rodeo.
And thank you so much for having me on here. I really believe that a lot of guys listen to your podcast and they appreciate it. I think it's a wonderful thing you do. I really do.
Thank you so much, Bruce. That means the world to me. I hope that you and your wife enjoy your 47th wedding anniversary this weekend. And thanks again for all you do for the line trade.
Well, thank you, Amy.
This episode of the Line Life podcast was written, recorded, and edited by Amy Fishbach. It was produced by Jeff Postlewaite. That's me. To listen to past episodes, visit www.tdworld.com/podcasts or find us at Podbean. You can also drop us a voice memo or message at linelifepodcast@gmail.com with your comments on this episode. We'd love to hear from you. Please follow this show on Podbean or your favorite podcasting app to be updated when new episodes are released. Thank you for listening.